we think that, it's great that we're starting early here in Illinois, given the climate that's probably going to be changing very, very soon on this issue. And I just wanted to kind of start out with, it reminds me of what's been happening in New Jersey. A year ago, Chris Christie was not running again for the governorship and was very unpopular after his run for presidency. And his designated successor had zero chance of winning and didn't win. Instead, a Wall Street, not billionaire, but kind of close to it, won the governorship, someone with no political experience before, but he won resoundingly in New Jersey. And on his main platform was the legalization of marijuana. He ended up hiring his chief of staff was the New Jersey Marijuana Business Association executive director, if you can believe it, became his chief of staff, and he basically said he was all in on the marijuana issue, and everyone thought it was a foregone conclusion because you had, a very powerful governor, a legislature that usually would go along, especially a legislature dominated by the same party as the governor. And what we ended up doing was similar to this, starting out small and growing, basically a grassroots movement, and then also obviously a movement at the Capitol to keep the pressure on. And here we are, almost 365 days to the day that this person was elected, Phil Murphy was elected governor. And legalization has not happened. It's totally been derailed. There's all these other issues that have been brought up. The Democratic caucus split. They don't support legalization. In fact, the New Jersey Black Caucus and the Hispanic Caucus came to our side and said, we really don't want pot shops in our neighborhood because we do know that will happen. We do know the edibles, the cookies, the candies, the unlimited potency, because there's zero potency cap on with these bills. They didn't want any of that. And basically we got the more voices, it started out a group like this, the more voices that kept speaking, including youth, law enforcement, the faith community, all kinds of folks, the medical communities. When we started talking, people really felt like, wow, there actually is opposition and we're not alone. And one by one, people stood up and said, look, we don't, similar to what Sam says, we don't want to be putting people in prison for pot, but the answer to that is not, a legal commercial market that advertises, pot candies with unlimited THC. There are much better solutions with regards to treatment, early prevention, awareness, intervention, and absolutely social justice. So that's really been that message. And I've kind of seen Illinois in a similar vein, because similar political dynamics that are going on. And I think you're blessed here to have such a great prevention network and youth network, and Jamie and Andy and Rochelle, everybody that's working on this, I think from the prevention point of view has really been key. And I think that this is the beginning of something that's just going to grow, and it's going to grow into something, we're going to have more and more supporters and more folks that are interested. So I'm very optimistic about Illinois, regardless of what happens in 15 days and regardless of what the rhetoric is. With regards to press, obviously the press wants to talk about this issue when they want to talk about it, which right now there are too many other things they want to talk about, but we do know that we are getting our voice out there. We're going to continue to do that, and I'm very, very excited about that. So we're going to kind of turn this into, like I said, instead of a round table, we're going to make sure Kirsten's there recording different folks. I thought maybe the people who had prepared statements can still read those statements, because I know I'd like to hear it. I'm sure other people would too. And we're going to broadcast this to over 70,000 Facebook followers, thousands of Twitter followers, and then others as soon as we're done. So maybe we will start with that, and then I would like to hear from anybody around the table who even just has questions. It doesn't have to, not a statement, just a comment or question, or even just sort of a strategy discussion point if you'd like to talk more process rather than the substance. That's also fine too. So I just wanted to open it. Again, I introduce myself. I'm Kevin Silva. I'm the president and CEO of SAM. I was a former advisor in the Obama administration for 2.5 years, and then I also worked in the Clinton and Bush administrations briefly. And SAM is an organization co-founded by Patrick Kennedy, the former congressman, and myself, as well as David Frum, who was a speechwriter for George Bush. And it's I said bipartisan, but it's really a nonpartisan organization. We are supported by a scientific advisory board. Dr. Weiner serves on that scientific advisory board, as do 15 other distinguished scholars from around the country. Our staff here, Levon Pettis, who's our Illinois State Director, Ashlyn Girth, who's our data analyst, are here in our Chicago office. We have some office space donated by the Gateway Foundation here in downtown, which we're very grateful for. And we really are kind of, I think, the singular voice pushing back with a coalition of organizations from all over the world, I'll say. We just briefed Pope Francis last year on this issue, the Queen of Sweden, the Prime Minister of Canada, the Prime Minister of the UK, as well as the work, of course, mainly that we do domestically. So maybe, Reverend, I'll turn it over to you. We were really, I know I was anticipating your remarks today, and I'd still like to hear them and like to hear your perspective on this issue.
Well, okay, I'll start it off. My name is Reverend Gregory Livingston. I'm the interim pastor right now at New Hope Baptist Church. I'm also the pastor, the president of the Coalition for a New Chicago. Been very active in so many things throughout the city. I was talking to, I don't know if you, is a deputy?
The undersheriff.
Undersheriff, about when I was the National Field Secretary at Rainbow Push. We were out there in South Barrington, and it was wonderful to make the reconnection with them because they were so kind to us in terms of what we were doing out there at that time. But this issue was huge. Let me begin this way. Back in 2001, I was on the staff of DePaul University, and we took a group of students down to the Apache Reservation in San Carlos, Arizona. And there, you could see the effects of alcohol on a decimated community, the effects of alcohol on a challenged community. And alcohol is outlawed. It is illegal on Native American reservations. But because there are casinos on the edge of the reservations, they bring the alcohol in. And it was there that I learned that the Native American lacked an enzyme to metabolize the alcohol properly. But firewater, as it was called maybe over 100 years ago, was weaponized. Alcohol was weaponized against the Native American in order to defeat them in this country becoming America, so to speak. And so I still see the same weaponization of these substances happening in our communities. They're not just drugs, they're weapons that are used, and when you use them in decimated and challenged communities, something else happens. And the reason I say decimated and challenged, there are liquor stores in some of the most affluent communities throughout this city, state, and country. But there's a difference when there's a liquor store in an affluent community and when there's a liquor store in a poor community. You don't see people hanging outside of the liquor store in Barrington or in the parking lot or sleeping out there. Why? Because they have some other place to go and they have other things in their lives that they cannot afford to lose. But when all you have is getting high, when all you have is getting drunk, it becomes a problem. So, drugs, whether illegal or legitimate, equal money. The pharmaceutical industry, the illegitimate drug industry, it's all about one thing, money. I don't want to get into any conspiracy theories, but the same companies that sell the flu shot make the flu vaccine. So, you can take that with however you want. But one of the things we've been emphasizing, especially over this summer period, is ending the tale of two cities here in Chicago. Okay. And we talk about ending the tale of two cities. We're talking about a legacy of segregation. When we did the Lakeshore Drive Wrigley Field piece on August 2nd, I picked August 2nd intentionally because August 5th was the 52nd anniversary of Dr. King's march through Marquette Park, where he was hit in the head with a brick and fell to the ground. And the reason I say that is because the march was about restrictive covenants. And if any of you have seen the play, the movie, whatever, Raisin in the Sun, Lorraine Hansberry, Chicago South Sider, she wrote that. And for some of you younger folk, restrictive covenants were where white homeowners would sign a covenant that they would not sell their homes to black folk. And so I never forget meeting Walter Mondale, who wrote the Fair Housing Act in 1968. He said, Livingston, we kept trying to get that passed. We're not on camera, so this is Facebook. We kept trying to get it passed. We couldn't get the Fair Housing Act passed until after April 4th, 1968, when King was assassinated, and then we were able to write the Housing Act, if you will, in blood. And I say all that to say that drugs in a poor community become a weapon that enforces the legacy of segregation. Because when you bring these drugs into the communities, all you're doing is pouring gasoline on a fire. And to commercialize and to legalize this is a real problem. And the black and brown communities, the poor white communities need to understand, don't be hoodwinked, bamboozled, tricked, or run amok. This is about one thing, money. And the level of unreciprocated consumerism that exists in poor communities. In other words, the dollar does not turn over in these communities. It comes in, but it doesn't go back out to the community. Drugs, we can find other things to legalize besides a recreational drug use. And that's part of the problem here, that we have to understand that underpinning this whole idea of legalization of marijuana is the idea of enforcing the legacy of segregation by segregating resources, segregating people from their dreams and their ability to become more than what they are right now. And so that's one reason that I'm here, is that this is necessary, this is crucial, because just like when you bring alcohol into a Native American reservation, when you legalize marijuana into less than affluent communities, you are creating, in effect, reservations on the south side of Chicago, reservations on the west side of Chicago, and people are going to be drugged to death. If they're doing it now with the black market, what do you think is going to happen if they do it with the legal market?
Well said.
Very, very well said, thank you. One of the things we've seen in Colorado is an increase in arrests among young African American and Hispanics, not among whites, for marijuana.
Yes.
Because of course you can't use it in public housing, you cannot use it in public, you can't use it at schools,
That's supposed to.
DUI, etc. So we've seen that increase, and of course if you look at who's actually making the money from this, it's a very few people that, very few basically older white guys and some young white guys. That's who owns this market. And we just found out that the CEO of Purdue Pharma, which he was the one who wrote the playbook for OxyContin, and for OxyContin, as you all know, they started in the poor white communities of Appalachia and the mining communities of the Appalachian region. That person is now the CEO of a marijuana company. Left Purdue Pharma to start his own pot. So of course this is about money, and it's not about bringing jobs to these communities. It's about bringing destruction. It's about hooking people, because that's the only way you make money in an addictive business. The alcohol industry doesn't make money off of most people who drink responsibly. They make money from the small number of people who consume 80% of the volume of alcohol. They need heavy users, and so did Purdue Pharma. It's the same thing. So thank you very much. Dr. Weiner from Linden Oaks, I hope you can share with us your statement.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Dr. Sabet. So my name is Aaron Weiner. I'm the Director of Addiction Services at Linden Oaks Behavioral Health and Edward Elmhurst Health. I'm here because I believe incredibly strongly, both from my own experience working and overseeing 5 different addiction clinics, as well as looking at the evidence, the scientific data, that this is a massive mistake, a huge step backwards if we were to commercialize marijuana in the state of Illinois, both for public health and for public safety. The marijuana industry is very strong. They have millions of dollars, numerous political connections, particularly here in Illinois. We've got our voices in public health. We have to speak out, we have to make it heard, because we need to protect our communities from the big business interests that would consign our future to pad their bank accounts. And make no mistake, for those of us in healthcare, there's no debate, none at all, about the subject of commercializing marijuana. To name just a few organizations: the American Medical Association, the Illinois State Medical Society, the American Society of Addiction Medicine, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and locally Lurie Children's Hospital have all come out in strong opposition to commercializing marijuana. We all understand when it comes to public health, creating a commercial market for marijuana is antithetical to our mission to improve the health of the communities that we serve. The experts have spoken, and our voice on this issue is unified. Why? Our allegiance is to science, and the science here is crystal clear. To give you just a couple examples, multiple longitudinal studies now have found that recreational use of marijuana raises the chances that someone will develop a new addiction to prescription opioid pills as much as 8 times. This, in the middle of an opioid epidemic, is unacceptable and fatally irresponsible. A recent meta-analysis found in comparing marijuana and alcohol use in kids that marijuana is significantly worse for their developing minds across numerous cognitive domains. In addition, another recent study demonstrated that marijuana can literally change the neuroanatomical structure of an adolescent's brain with regular use. Shocking and disturbing. A study published about 6 months ago in the American Journal of Obstetrics found that 70% of marijuana dispensaries in Colorado, both recreational and medical, recommended that first trimester pregnant mothers use marijuana for treatment of morning sickness. To justify the recommendation, one of the dispensary employees said, and I quote, that marijuana is like an aspirin that is probably better. Marijuana extracts such as butane hash oil or BHO, wax, and chatter are being published about in schizophrenia journals due to their neurotoxicity in relationship to the development of acute or persistent psychosis. These extracts, which can be up to 98% pure THC, can be vaped, including using easily modified jewel cartridges, you can look this up on YouTube, and are one of the fastest growing markets in states with commercial programs. So I could go on. The data is honestly overwhelming in both its breadth and its depth. But I want to leave you with this for this statement. A recent publication in an international drug policy journal concluded that in the United States, and I quote, scientific evidence plays a limited role in the development of marijuana policy, which is just, again, not the direction we should be moving as a country or a state. There is a path forward for drug policy in Illinois, but giving birth to a new for-profit addiction industry is not the answer we're looking for, and it never has been. Healthcare is unified in this regard, and we will speak out at every opportunity. Our new campaign will let the public know the truth about the marijuana industry so we can demand real solutions from our state representatives.
Thank you very much. Peter Bensinger, former head administrator of the DEA.
Yes, I used to head the DEA years ago under Presidents Ford, Carter, and Reagan, and also was chairman of the Illinois Youth Commission and director of corrections, and head of the Crime Victims Division of the Illinois Attorney General's Office, and chairman of the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority. I could talk to you about my own views about marijuana because for the last 30 years, up until a couple of years ago, I was founder and head of a counseling service, an employee assistance program that reached 10 million lives. And our company listened to people with personal problems, addictions to alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, opioids, personal problems, gambling. And I've given talks on marijuana, but I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to refer you to a letter in the Denver Post from the U.S. Attorney in Colorado, Bob Troyer, who is a career Justice Department prosecutor, worked under the Obama administration, was 5 years the first assistant U.S. Attorney, and he's been there since legalization started. Here's what he said in a public article in the Denver Post, which I commend our legislators to read in depth. It's time we looked at marijuana commercialization. Youth in Colorado are using marijuana at a rate 85% higher than the national average. Marijuana traffic fatalities, these are drivers who are on the highways with marijuana in their system getting into a fatal car crash are 151% higher now after legalization than before. In Colorado, they're not bragging about the tax revenue because there's no gain. Marijuana tax revenues in Colorado add up to 0.8% of the total budget for the state of Colorado. And sources have identified that those costs of dealing with the problem of marijuana exceed the amount of revenue that has been achieved through public health and safety concerns. One of the other arguments you'll hear is that maybe we can do away with the black market if we legalize it. Just the reverse has happened in Colorado. The cartels are cheering. They're selling 40%, 40% of the marijuana being used in Colorado. Why? They're selling to the people under 21. That they have to get it legally over 21. And they're selling it cheaper. There's no tax. They've moved into Colorado from Mexico, Cuba, China, everywhere. Does it control marijuana only in Colorado? No. Because last year, the marijuana from Colorado produced over 6.5 metric tons that left the state, and there were 80,000 black market plants found in federal lands. In Illinois, our national parks, Starved Rock, the beautiful parks that we have in the state and the national forests are going to be taken over in part by these commercial growers. Does the industry trump it in Colorado? Well, there'll be less alcohol use. Actually, Colorado's alcohol consumption has steadily climbed since legalization. And opioid use has been a major problem because heavy marijuana users also use these opioids. What this U.S. Attorney, Bob Troyer, says is something that I said with Nancy Reagan 40 years ago. Just say no. Only the no is K-N-O-W. So I would urge our legislators to find out what's happened in other states, the one that started it first, to listen to Reverend Livingston, who I thought was very accurate in describing how marijuana can weaponize a community, to Dr. Weiner, who understands the health and science, and to Kevin Sabat, who's understood this, having a perspective for many years on the subject. Just say no. Let's find out what's happened elsewhere. Illinois doesn't need to put the highways at risk, to put the kids at risk, to put pregnant mothers at risk, to put communities at risk, and most of all, to put children at risk. Because believe me, once this is legalized, kids' use skyrockets. That's my thoughts.
That's all 100% correct. I concur with all of it. You know, we've seen, especially in legalized states, not only the rates of teenagers, but actually 18 to 25-year-olds, people that are entering the workforce, people that are entering university, those use rates have skyrocketed. It's not just use, but it's levels of consumption. It's the heavy use, because we're not talking about 5% Woodstock weed anymore. We're not talking about that. We're talking about up to 99.9% as advertised in legal states in crystallized form, used for dabbing. And there's such a disconnect, I think, between what someone might think of when they think of legal pot. They think of just growing a plant and smoking a joint that's low THC. They don't think about the commercial industry and the advertising and the high potent THC. And one of the other arguments people use is, well, we'll get it done the right way. I've heard from a lot of people in Illinois saying, from legislators who support this, saying, Colorado's messed it up. We're going to figure it out, do it the right way. In my state of New York, of course, in New York, we always think we can do everything right also. So we think we can do it the right way too. The problem is, when you open this up to a commercial market and an industry, even the best intended plans get ruined. And in Washington State, here's one example of this. They legalized by a voter referendum because most people thought it was about decriminalization. That's why they voted for it. We did polling. They thought they were voting to get people out of prison. They didn't realize they were voting for an industry. Anyway, they voted it in 2012, and it has taken 6 years to finally get something through to say they should ban edibles and candies, gummy bears that have THC in. They should ban kid-friendly candies. We thought we had a victory 2 weeks ago there, a small victory. Over the weekend, it was completely reversed. The Washington Liquor Board announced, you know what, that idea we had last week, we actually are not going to go forward with it to ban the candies. Why? Because the industry and the special interest groups that spend millions of dollars on lobbying every year in Olympia and throughout the state convinced them over the weekend not to do this, because a huge part of their market share is these edibles and kid-friendly items. So, there's sometimes these ideas that, well, we'll do it responsibly, we'll figure out how to limit it, we'll let localities choose whether they want marijuana stores or not. The reality is the entire state, your entire area is affected. One final thing on local communities is that in the majority of, actually in all the states where they have voted on this to legalize it, the majority of the local towns, when given an option, because they're not always given an option, but when given an option, they actually vote against having marijuana stores in their community. So,
In Colorado, I think 56% of the
oh yeah,
municipalities
at least 56.
have opted out.
Yeah.
And I think, Kevin, the Illinois legislators have this misperception that you've just identified. We can do it differently.
Right.
But once marijuana is legal, it becomes rampant. The county board president, Tony Breckwinkle, didn't even realize the state has decriminalized marijuana.
Right.
And there's the thought that, well, why are we gonna legalize it? Because we don't want people from disadvantaged communities to go to prison and jail.
Right.
But today in Illinois, no one has an arrest record for marijuana use. No one's getting jailed, and no one's going to prison. And that's an alternative to legalization. Decriminalization, not having a prison record, not having a criminal record, not getting jailed. I don't think it's good to use. None of the speakers up to now think it's good to use because of health and safety. But it isn't as though the person who uses is going to be given a free pass if it's legal.
Mason-Dixon did a poll in Illinois, exactly what you just described, Peter, where they basically said, are you in favor of legalization of marijuana, yes or no? And something like 60% said yes when given that binary question. The very next question, they said, okay, thank you for that thought, but knowing that marijuana is decriminalized, marijuana use is decriminalized, and knowing that and that we have a medical program, now what policy do you want? And support for legalization went from 50-some% down to 20-some% when people realized that actually it is decriminalized and medicalized. So much of the support for it is about criminal justice reform. And by the way, we're in favor of criminal justice reform. We don't want to see the private prisons. We don't want to see the arrests. We don't want to see needless resources. But that's, as Peter said, that's not really what's happening. And I was hoping the undersheriff maybe from Lake County could talk about that. Yeah, sure.
But Justin, I just want to say this in terms of, because everything here is incredible, and I remember Peter now, I really do. And, I do. He's been on the case wonderfully for a number of years. And through LaVon and Jamie, I learned something I didn't know, is that the iconic capital of weed in the U.S., Compton, California, they too understood that legalization equals weaponization. And they did not need marijuana as a weapon against their population. So they said no to legalization, because legalization equals weaponization.
That's right. That's right. It's Charmaine Hayes and her husband. They had 2 ballot initiatives in local Compton, which the pot industry funded. They both went down in flames, by more than 2 to 1. Because people said, they said we want hope, not dope.
Yeah.
We want to legalize something, legalize jobs.
I like that.
You want to legalize jobs. Don't say that the only area where we're going to get jobs is the pot industry. It's insulting.
That's crazy.
They said that's insulting. You're saying that drugs, the one area all of a sudden where you have interest in helping our community is to put pot shops there? Where is the actual social justice? And we're seeing this also in Detroit today. We have there's a ballot initiative in Michigan, and we have a huge field organization in the inner city of Detroit, where the 2 slogans are hope not dope and legalized weed means corporate greed. And people, when they hear that, they realize what this is about, and what you were saying, Reverend. Undersheriff, I'm hoping you can speak a little bit about the criminal justice aspects of this and the other issues you're seeing.
Sure. So Sheriff Curran wishes that he could have attended. He's a big supporter of the movement. He was here three or 4 months ago, and he would have liked to have made it down. He asked me to come down and speak on his behalf. You know, a few things that I've learned, especially over the last few months in researching this, and right away we went out to start to get ahead of this, to train our deputies as far as how to detect on the highways, because as you mentioned, the fatalities are going to increase and the roads are going to become that much more unsafe, if you will. And I drove down from Lake County to get down here, and traffic is an issue all over the state. And so the large concern is the increase in fatalities, obviously, with this, and then our inability to develop a case strong enough to prosecute, because we have no real way of detecting. Right now, the technology hasn't advanced. Like with alcohol, we have portable breath tests. We have intoxilizers that we can understand the amount of blood alcohol levels, and there is no accurate way to determine that with this. So basically, you're going to put something into law enforcement's hands that we're going to have a very difficult time prosecuting and enforcing any laws to help. And in fact, I think studies are showing that the majority of parents and kids in states where this has been legalized, they believe that because of that driving under the influence of marijuana is actually legal, which is very disturbing as it grows. We are a strong supporter of the Lake County Opioid Initiative also, and so monthly the coroner's office reports on our overdose and the deaths that they investigate. And at almost 100% of all of our overdose deaths, marijuana is present in the systems, because they go back to measure what different drugs are being used. And while the range of the overdose death varies between cocaine and methamphetamines and opioids, with the majority being opioids, almost all of those find the presence of marijuana with them, which is very alarming. That obviously, this is a strong presence in the problems that we're already identifying. I mean, I think they're saying that 62,000 deaths this year alone nationally for the opioids, and that's just on its way up. And so if you want to talk about a gateway drug, I think it's obvious that this presence is felt. And so Sheriff Curran is very much supportive of smart approaches to marijuana. And as I said before, I thought that this was, I kept describing this as students against marijuana, because we initially heard about this from the Stevenson High School group. And they spoke at one of our chiefs of police luncheons up in Lake County, and the sheriff was so moved by their presentation that he jumped on board right away. So Sheriff Curran supports everything that they're doing out of Stevenson, and of course statewide with this, because, and I think students against marijuana is, I'm not quite sure that there is a smart approach to this. While I do think that the decriminalization is a start to all of this, I don't see where the legalization is going to take us in a positive.
Absolutely.
Let's
I
hear
think we
from
should rename
Stevenson.
Sam to Students Against Marijuana. Stevenson students against marijuana. Double S-A-M. I like that.
Let's hear
Sheriff.
from Stevenson.
Thank you. Well, now it's time to hear from Rochelle from Stevenson. Why don't you tell us a little about your perspective? Because you're the one, and it's your generation that's going to be the most affected by this.
So thank you all. My name is Rochelle Tucker. I'm a junior from Stevenson High School. A few months ago, I joined Catalyst, a youth group dedicated to preventing underage drinking and substance abuse among our high schoolers and their feeder middle schools. Even more recently, I joined the Catalyst Marijuana Legislative Committee, and we are a team of students advocating against the legalization of marijuana in our state of Illinois. So before joining, I hadn't been exposed to all this research, as Dr. Weiner mentioned, about that lay behind the detrimental effects that marijuana could impose on a community or teens themselves. Proponents of marijuana don't talk about these effects, and they don't talk about how they will be most harmful for my generation. In fact, according to a 2018 Monitoring the Future study, 1 in 4 12th graders claim that they would increase use or begin using post-legalization. And statistics even show that almost 70% of seniors claim that they believe that smoking marijuana is not harmful. Legalization will only lower this perception of risk and result in higher rates of teen smoking. A recent study published by the American Journal of Psychiatry found that marijuana causes more harm to adolescents than alcohol to their developing brains. And looking at states that have already legalized, we notice that youth use rates are higher than the national average. In Alaska, we noticed that they're 49% higher. In Colorado, they're 30% higher. In Oregon, they're 40% higher. Illinois is currently slightly below this national average. Legalizing will only increase access and make marijuana more normalized, thus causing our state to go over this national average. And as research shows, as again Dr. Weiner mentioned, that the brain continues to develop until your mid-20s, and is thought to be particularly sensitive to drug exposure during this time of neurodevelopment. In other words, teens are far more susceptible to any kind of substances at this age. Studies have even shown that teen cannabis use can result in a drop of 8 IQ points, which is very substantial for youth our age, as we're continuously taking in information from school, sports, etc. And just like tobacco and alcohol industries before, these industries only market towards youth because they know that they will make the most profits marketing towards teens while their brains are still developing and while they are still susceptible to this kind of advertisement. Marijuana products being sold in these dispensaries are often called Alien Rock Candy, Pot Tarts, Girl Scout Cookies, OG Kush. Clearly, these names are not being targeted to teens. They are being targeted to teens. We've noticed this trend in other states as well. After marijuana was legalized in Colorado, there was a spike in the number of children seen in emergency hospital rooms for overdoses, with many of them containing treats for cannabis. Moreover, teens don't realize that the potency that marijuana contains has significantly increased over the years. Marijuana can now result in dangerous effects that cause irreversible harm. These industries know that if they can't attract youth, they will quickly go out of business. By legalizing, we are letting companies grow a lucrative industry among our teen and youth and taking advantage of them. Why are we letting the industry make the most profit off of our teens and putting the financial interests of our state over our youth? Their most effective way of doing this is to make sure youth are on board, because our vulnerable state is what will make them the most profit. These profit-hungry corporations do not care for the well-being of my generation and are appealing to youth. I don't want my generation to clean up the mess that this legislation will make. Thank you.
You're hired. That was excellent. And yeah, we'll take a question in a second, but off that, Rochelle, it's a perfect time to introduce this.
Yeah.
We are going to be debuting this ad across the state, first on social media, and then in billboards and other places. Marijuana has a kids menu. Don't legalize, and folks can go to healthyillinois.org. We know that any legislation, even if it bans these edibles in the beginning, we know that it will come back. It's not a forever ban. The industry has to rely on non-smoked products to get people to use their product. Remember, smoking rates have plummeted over the last 20 years. Smoking is unpopular now. Marijuana is making smoking cool again, and it's introducing a product in a non-smoked form to appeal to more people and really to appeal to young people, Rochelle. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. We have some questions, and then I'd like to open up the table to anybody that'd like to make some comments around the table, please.
If I could get the pronunciation of your name.
Rochelle Tucker.
Okay, thank you. One of the questions I have is this. I met with a couple of state lawmakers, Democratic state lawmakers, who seem to be on board with the legalization of marijuana. And one thing that they said is, we have this opioid crisis, and perhaps marijuana is part of the answer to the opioid crisis. What's your take on that?
Dr. Weiner can talk about that from the scientific.
I'd like to move my microphone up a little closer.
Let me start though with a bit of a historical perspective on that. Is that where you want it to be?
Well, actually, this is kind of an odd setup here.
Yeah, a bit of round table.
Yeah.
We were proud of it for a while.
It was really good. We loved it.
At the time.
Okay.
Oh, we'll pass the mic down.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Pass
So,
Mike.
So just to, and then I want Dr. Weiner and others to chime in, but just on that, remember that 100 years ago, coca and cocaine wine, which was first turned into then powder cocaine later, was promoted as an answer to alcoholism. Then it was promoted as an answer to the opium heroin crisis that happened, which we've had other heroin crises in our history 120 years ago. We have seen this happen throughout history when people propose one drug over another. And now with the studies, and Dr. Weiner will talk about them, the studies actually show the opposite. They show that drugs like marijuana are precipitating the use of other drugs like opiates. Aaron?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. So we hear this narrative a lot, that marijuana can be part of the solution. And the biggest issue with this is almost everywhere you turn on this issue, you get data saying the opposite. There is some data that's cited by pro sides, but they ignore all the rest of it, which is the majority. So to give you an example, and I mentioned this earlier, we have longitudinal studies that show that if you're using marijuana recreationally, you put yourself, the one I'm thinking of most, that I used to talk about the most, was looking at a 3-year longitudinal study. Infrequent users were 5 times more likely to develop a new prescription pill disorder on opioids within 3 years. And frequent and very frequent users, it was 8 times as high. So even if, and we have seen some evidence about this, even if there was some amount of reduction in the beginning, it's a time bomb. It's a time bomb. We've heard some people say that it can help you get off of heroin. We have no data to suggest that's the case, and we actually have some data. I was at a conference about 4 months ago showing that people are less likely to stay sober. And part of the reason for that is that if you are addicted to something, you're in the behavioral habit of using a substance to cope with something. Yeah, it's a behavioral pathway. You use it to cope with something physical, like say pain, you use it to cope with something emotional. So if you substitute one drug with another, then you're not changing anything. We know that in the addiction treatment field, inside and out. That's part of the process of recovery. So if you're going over to marijuana, it doesn't actually help you in the long run. Lastly, and I want to speak to this as well, but with the development of new opioid disorders, 92% of people who use heroin start with marijuana first. And the reason for that, right, that's not a one-to-one. Right? Risk doesn't equal determinism, and I think a lot of people will think, oh, well, I smoked marijuana once and I don't use heroin, so that must not be, that's not how risk works, right? The more people who do it, the more this will happen, and the way it occurs, there's, again, another false debate about, like, is this a gateway drug? And I think unequivocally, yes, and here's why. For smoking, a lot of people will say this, we know that smoking causes lung cancer. Smoking cigarettes causes lung cancer, and we say it causes. We use the C word, causes, right? Which in science is a very difficult word to do, despite the fact that we don't have any randomized controlled trials looking at causation for smoking, because you can't have a group of people and say, well, you people chain smoke for 30 years and you people don't, and we'll see who has cancer and who's dead at the end of the study. That's wildly unethical, right? So what we have are associations, very strong ones, and we have a pathway, a biological pathway where you can see DNA mutagenesis from using tobacco products that causes cancer. You put the two of those things together, we know that's the way it works. We have the same thing for marijuana. We have such strong evidence. The NISDA data recently shows that the kids who use marijuana are 10 times more likely to use illicit substances. We have 92% of kids, people who smoke marijuana or use heroin having smoked marijuana first. I could go on and on. The pathway is this. Someone walks up to you, if you've never used an illicit drug in your life, and they say, you know what, do you want to tie off and inject heroin? You're going to say, one, no, and 2, you can use some help, right? That's going to probably be the response, right? That's a very high bar to get over. But instead, say you're young, say your mind is developing, and someone comes up and says, hey, you're already vaping, right? You're already vaping. Why don't you vape this extract? Why don't we do some THC, or why don't we do marijuana? It's a plant anyway, right? It's a plant. It's all these myths that we're hearing, all these slogans. Then you start doing that, and now you're someone who's using a substance to change your mental state. You're doing something that no matter what under 21 is going to be illegal, and you're getting associated with people who do this for fun, who do this habitually. Now when someone comes to a party and has Xanax, Now you're more likely to do that. Now, in terms of snorting heroin, we're seeing that a lot. Now you're doing that. It's a little more palatable than injecting. And that's how this happens. I can say this with conviction because I've heard it a million times. Again, I run drug treatment centers. This is not a rare story at all. We hear it all the time. So the moral of the story, it really is a false assumption. And based on only tidbits of data, this idea that marijuana can be part of the solution to an opioid crisis. You want solutions to pain problems? How about promoting acupuncture, right? Or any of the, I could name probably a dozen things off the top of my head, better for chronic pain, that are either approved by the FDA or have better risk-benefit ratios. Let's talk about those, not marijuana.
Let me add 2 points. First, marijuana is not approved by the Food and Drug Administration. So for the legislators to say it'd be a good idea for them to use this instead of opioids, they're going against medicine. Secondly, the Lancet study found that heavy marijuana users are more likely to abuse opioids rather than to stop using. These drugs work. They work. I'm an old hand, over 80, but back when I was chairman of the Youth Commission, we did a random study of 400 of the young men that came into our juvenile facilities. Most of them had used drugs. And we asked those that used heroin, what did you start with? Over 85% said they started with marijuana. And just that use, as Dr. Weiner said, gets the individual into using, depending, getting hooked, getting dependent. And why make a drug available that is subject to abuse and dependency? And like the Reverend said, becomes an addictive tool where they're captured. It's really irresponsible if the Illinois legislature thinks legalizing marijuana is going to be good for the youth of our state, good for the safety of our state, good for the health of our state, and good for the revenue of our state. It's going to invite more illegal drug use and sales. I want to thank the panel members, each of whom really gave a different perspective. But the public doesn't hear this. And they don't hear the science. And the legislators don't hear this. In part because they don't want it. They think this is something that's going to be politically popular. And they're thinking of politics instead of public health, instead of their kids. And someday we have to have leadership in Illinois from both parties that put our kids first.
We're gonna make sure they hear it next year, definitely. Hold
We have several people
Yes.
from the community here that had been in previous events, and I just wanted to find out what neighborhood they're from and what organization or, you represent.
And just any thoughts on the issue too?
Good morning, everyone. Happy birthday.
You too, always.
I'm Reverend Walter Jones from West Garfield Park Community Stakeholders and Fathers Who Care. I brought with me today some of our young leaders of the West Garfield Park Youth Council. And of course, we share and echo some of the sentiments that are shared by you. We collectively put it out there. And we also believe that this is also a gateway to more extensive treatment and not of the drug use. But I think I would love to hear what some of these young folks are actually thinking, so we can kind of get the feel of where their heads are and what they think we should be doing in our efforts to try to hopefully bring some additional attention to our elected officials not to legalize marijuana. David, if you don't mind. And just let them know who you are, if you're okay with that.
First of all, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is David Elam. I'm President Emeritus of the West Garfield Park Youth Council on the west side of Chicago. And we at the West Garfield Park Youth Council are very potent on this issue for to be against to not legalize marijuana. The reason being is to just, I'm just gonna flat out say it. I'm listening to everybody in the room, and there's been a constant comment, whereas if you legalize marijuana, you're only starting something that is going to end up worse. The reason why I say that is marijuana in my community is very high. I'm from the west side of Chicago, in West Garfield Park. West Garfield Park is a known area for drug abuse. Drug abuse in West Garfield Park is very, very, very high strong, from marijuana to opioids to any other drug, from heroin, crack cocaine, to any other drug that you want to name. It's there. It saddens me as a youth leader in my community for people of power to want to legalize something that is not only harmful but also deadly to our young people. We work with youth from the ages of 13 to 24 years old, even older, but that does not give them the right to want to legalize marijuana. I notice I've heard a lot of different names that you all call marijuana, but I haven't heard the name that my community calls it. Marijuana in my community, we don't say marijuana. We don't say weed. We say loud. We call it loud. The reason why they call it loud is because it's so potent. There's a strong stench from this marijuana where it is being drenched in other substances for it to become more potent. They drench it in embalming fluid. They drench it in fentanyl, whereas it gives them a higher state. Once you consume this substance, whatever field that you're in, it's a mood. Basically, whatever mood that you're currently in, that's the mood that you're gonna increase once you consume this marijuana, or loud as we call it. But it's only starting to higher usage. Like you said, I didn't get your name.
Aaron Weiner.
Mr. Weiner, you said that drug use with marijuana wants people to start something else. Meaning, oh, let's try marijuana. Okay, you tried marijuana. Now you're on to something even more dangerous. You're consuming marijuana, so something in your mind and in your brain is telling you, I need something else. What else can I consume to make me feel the way that I want to feel? That's why these substances and this drug abuse in our communities, in our neighborhoods, and in our states needs to be recognized. It needs to be put on the table. It needs to be taught that young people of this generation are not being taught the right way of consumption of marijuana. Meaning, you need to know what you're putting in your body.
Right.
If you don't know what you're consuming, you just think that, oh, okay, it's a party drug, it's a way for me to, escape.
And its potency has gone
Yes.
way up from the old days.
Yes, it really has, because there's drug abuse today will not stop. I'm just gonna say it. It's not gonna stop. It may decrease, but it's not gonna stop. The reason drug abuse is not going to stop is because there's always a new substance that is coming abroad. I wanna bring to you all's attention, I don't know if you all are familiar with lean. Anybody in here familiar with that?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, for those of you who aren't, the substance called lean, that's another high potent drug in our communities, preferably on the west side of Chicago. Lean is a substance whereas it's used for, it's a downer, but it's consumed, it's made up of codeine, ice, Jolly Rancher candy, and sometimes they mix it with alcohol for them to become more eluded with whatever. And that's also a feeling drug, whatever mood that you're in. If you're angry, if you're sad, if you're enraged, that drug will only increase that current emotion and state that you're in. And the reason they call it lean, so the reason why they call it lean, and it goes back way beyond before I was born, but when I came upon it and did my research about it, the reason why they call it lean is because with alcohol, you drink alcohol. With lean, you don't drink lean, you sip it, meaning you take small amounts of it, and as you're consuming it, you begin to lean from side to side. So it's called lean because once consumed, you can't even stand up. You're leaning against the wall. You're leaning up against a corner. You're leaning on someone's shoulder. And it's really detrimental to our young people and to their health. And what we as community leaders, people who are involved in the community, need to first understand, number one, why our young people are doing it. What's giving them the reason to want to consume these opioids and these different substances, and why we need to come together as a collaborative effort of community leaders and partners to understand and let it be known that legalization of marijuana should not be brought to the attention, and with the edibles as well. Edibles are, many of y'all may know, they are candies, brownies, and those go back way as well. Many people don't know that a regular joint versus an edible, a regular joint consumption versus an edible consumption, the edible consumption gets you more higher than a regular marijuana joint because it's more into it, meaning it's sweet. You drench it in candy, you drench it in brownies. These are sweet substances that people use it with and for. And you get very, the average high from a regular marijuana joint would last you probably about 2 to 6 hours versus a THC edible, which will last 4 to 12 hours. And that's very potent, instrumental to wanting to know the crisis. So in all of that, I just want to say that I appreciate everyone who is taking a stand against this democracy of wanting to legalize marijuana, because once, like you all were saying, once you legalize marijuana, you are only opening the door for more detrimental substances, and that will deteriorate, destroy, and just demonize our young people, and that does not need to happen. So we need to come together, take a stand, have things like this for people can be more aware and more concerned about what our young people are involved with, because we are the future, and with you all's help, teamwork can make the dream work. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's really important to show we have students from various demographics, various communities that are dealing with similar issues, and that they are both standing against marijuana commercialization and legalization, and feel that it's detrimental to their community, their peers, and the networks that they have, and that this is something of great concern to them. And our youth are our future, so we should be paying attention to what they're saying.
And I hope this can continue. I have to go grab a flight right now to go back to the airport. I just landed and I gotta leave. But I hope this discussion can continue. I'll tell you that us at SAM, and we, like I said, have offices in New York, DC, Chicago, San Diego. We stand with you. We want to help boost all of you up. We need you, and we're going to be needing to take caravans to Springfield to, educate our legislators. We need to be joining with other organizations to make this table even bigger, and I know we are doing that. We need to continue to do that, and we're going to be launching this campaign, and we're open to other campaigns. If you say, you know what, in my neighborhood, this kind of campaign would be more relevant, or where I'm from, this would be more relevant, tell us. We're here as a resource. We stand with you, and we're going to keep supporting and fighting. And just like in New Jersey, where we're 350 days into the time when they were supposed to legalize and they haven't done it, we're going to be here next year saying the same thing. They haven't done it because of the efforts of all of you. So, sorry, please
Before
continue.
you
I want to
run,
thank everybody.
can
Yes.
we get a group photo with the
Sure,
signs?
maybe we get everybody.